Welcome to Surrender School.
Let's do a quick review of what we talked about with the history of last week. So last week we introduced you to who Joe and Charley is and how this came about to use the Joe and Charley recordings. We talked a little bit about the AA history. We talked a lot about the AA history because that's what it was all about. And in that AA history, we got introduced to Bill W., who is the co-founder, who's one of the co-founders of AA. We also met Ebby Thatcher, and that is the correct spelling of his name. Ebby Thatcher was a friend of Bill's who carried the message to him. He told him of the problem and he told him of the solution. But Bill needed more information before he could have a spiritual experience. And that's when we got introduced to Dr. Silkworth. When we get introduced to Dr. Silkworth, he starts to tell him about the program of action, telling him that, you're staying sober by trying to sane all these people about in the streets, then maybe that is the action that you need to take in order to stay sober. So then we learned that Ebby was taking Bill W. to the Oxford group meetings where he was having he was learning more about the vital spiritual experience and learning about spiritual matters. And in the process of doing this, he had to go to Akron, Ohio for a business deal. And in that business deal, that didn't go very well. Bill was about to start drinking, and he was at the Mayflower Hotel, and he was broke, and he, thinking, I'm going to start drinking and he was going to go into the bar. And when he remembered what Dr. Silkworth told him that, hey, you're staying sober by carrying the message. So maybe you need to carry the message to another alcoholic. That is how he got introduced to Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob Smith, how we get introduced to Dr. Bob Smith is we had Mrs. Cyberling who answered the phone when Bill called, and she connected Ann Smith, which is Dr. Bob's wife, and she connected with her, and she told Dr. Bob, that, hey, there's a guy from New York City who says he has a solution for alcoholism. So that's how they ended up meeting. They met the next day on Mother's Day, and what was going to be a 15-minute meeting ended up being hours upon hours, and realized they had a lot in common. And then we find out that Dr. Bob had a spiritual experience and he never drank again to the day that he died. So we knew that Dr. Bob now needs to work with somebody in order to be able to keep what he has. And in comes our AA number 3, which is Bill Dodson. And then Bill Dodson, we got introduced to him, and that's that picture that you see in AA with the guy on the bed, and Bill and Bob are sitting next to the bed. That is Bill Dodson. So then we learn a little bit about how the book was written and how we got the name Alcoholics Anonymous. And in the process of doing so, they knew that after Bill was staying sober, Dr. Bob was staying sober, now Bill Dodson was staying sober, and there were about 40 other people that were staying sober that they counted. So that is how they said, well, we need to write a book. They had many other options, but this was the one that stuck. They wrote a book, and they ended up calling the book Alcoholics Anonymous. So the very first Alcoholics Anonymous that we were introduced to was actually a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. Prior to them starting to call themselves the group, calling themselves Alcoholics Anonymous, they were known as the Drunk Squad of the Oxford group. And they changed their name to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that is how we got the name. And then lastly, we looked at how the book was laid out and how it coincides with the steps. So we knew that step one of the book was the problem. Step two is the solution, and step 3 through 12 is the program of action. Those are things that Bill needed to know before he could actually recover and from alcoholism. So, and the problem was it's going to be in doctor's opinion and Bill's story. Doctor's opinion is what we're going to cover today. So we're going to be talking about the problem. Step 2, the solution, that is chapters 2, 3, and 4. There is a solution more about more about alcoholism, and we agnostics. And steps 3 through 12 is the program of action, and that's chapters 5 chapter 6, and chapter 7, how it works into action and working with others. So then we get in. So once again, I'm going to allow Joe and Charley to introduce themselves better than I could ever introduce them. I'm hoping that you can hear it okay. And if you have any difficulty hearing, just please let me know.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Joe, and I'm an alcoholic. And it's truly by God's grace and the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I found in a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm sober today, and for that I'm very, very thankful. Charlie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Charlie Parmlett. I'm a very grateful recovering alcoholic.
Hi, Charlie.
Because I'm a member of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and by the grace of the power that I found in the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't found necessary to take a drink for 10,516 days today, one day at a time, and for this I'm grateful. We always like to say as we start one of these things that we do not consider ourselves to be the gurus of the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't consider ourselves to be the experts on anything at all. We're just two old drunks, met together several years ago, found we had a mutual interest in the big book. We've studied it together for quite some time. Hopefully we've learned a few things about it. And those few things we've learned about it, we just love to be able to share them with other people. We do not attempt to speak for AA as a whole, and you are most certainly free to agree or disagree with anything that we say throughout the entire weekend as you see fit.
And I also wanted to reiterate that as well. I am not a guru. I am just another bozo on the bus here. So I absolutely want to make sure that I say that I am not speaking on behalf of any 12-step program, but rather my experiences is what I will be sharing based on what I've heard from these Joe and Charley recordings. So today, once again, anything in green is going to be a link for you. If you go to the website, if you go to Surrender School's website, you should be able to get this document. So today we're going to cover briefly the preface. We'll look at the algebra problem. You'll understand what that is in a few moments. And we'll also look at the recovery section. Those are the three sections that we didn't get to cover. And then we will start into the doctor's opinion. And once again, there's a link to the video, and then there's a link to the AA Big Book online version that we'll be using today. So we start with the preface here, and we're in Roman numeral 11. And what this says is because this book has become the basic text, and that's very important for our society, and has helped such large number of alcoholic men and women to recover, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made to it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing AA's recovery program has been left largely untouched. And once again, that's Roman numeral 11 in the fourth edition of the Big Book and the preface. And what they're talking about in this particular is the basic text, meaning that this is actually a textbook. They're referring to this book as a textbook, and a textbook is nothing more than something that builds upon one chapter building upon the next. To be able to give the reader more information and learn from it. And there's also saying there exists a sentiment against any radical changes that have been made. And I swear to God, I've asked myself a million times, why can't this be rewritten? Well, we're going to find out in a couple of slides why it has not been rewritten, mainly because it works. But there is a sentiment among the 12-step community against any radical changes being made. Now, you're going to learn that there have been some slight changes to page numbering, slight changes to the doctor's opinion, which we'll see in the next couple of slides. So we start by looking at the history once again. And when they talk about that algebra problem, what happens, and this is what Charley has a story about, he says, one of the greatest mistakes that we make in the 12-step community is we tell people to go to chapter 5 on how it works, not realizing that if they haven't read the doctor's opinion or chapter 1, they have no idea what the problem is. They don't know that they're powerless. And if they're going to skip over to page 5, they have they have no idea what we mean when we say we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. Most of us don't think that we're insane when we walk through the doors, but because our drunken lives or our addictive lives become so normal to us that we don't see our own insanity. So if you tell a newcomer to go in and go to straight to step 3 on how it works, they are not going to know what you're talking about. We present a very difficult problem. It would be something like presenting someone who doesn't know how to add or subtract an algebra problem. So that's what they're saying here. It's very difficult to start with step 3 and how it works unless you have information on step 1 and step 2. And then they talk about why hasn't this book yet been updated? And the answer really is collectively, we have never found it necessary. And let's hear what Charley has to say about that.
First printing came out in 1939. By 1955, the fellowship had changed. The stories in the back of the book were there for the newcomer to be able to identify with. In 55, since bottom had come up, age had come down, more and more women coming in, they said we need to change those stories in the back of the book. So in 1955, they deleted some stories, added some more, came out with a second edition, but the recovery section remained the same. And I think what's so important for me today is whether I'm reading a first, second, or third edition, we have never changed the recovery section. I wonder why we've never found it necessary to change it. Because it works, doesn't it? Yeah, you betcha. And why does it work? 3 reasons, I think. Alcoholics haven't changed a bit. They're still doing the same fun things today they did back in 1939. Haven't changed a lick. Alcohol hasn't changed. The names have changed, but alcohol is the same thing today it was in 1939. Human nature never changes. It's the same today as it was in 2,000 years ago. Therefore, we've never found it necessary to change it. I think that's probably one of the greatest miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know how we love to change things. Everybody that's ever read it certainly has rewritten it at least twice in their minds. Collectively, though, we've never found it necessary, Joe.
Certainly have rewritten it more than once in my mind to be more inclusive for sure. And it'll at least be more technologically driven, but we're not there yet. So I'll just go with what I have here. So then we start talking about a little bit about the recovery section, and you're going to hear Joe talk a little bit about how at the start of the book of what the recovery section looks like. So this time we're looking at the forward to the first edition. Last week we talked about the forward to the second edition. This week we're talking about the forward to the first edition. This slide presents why the book was actually written.
Go to the forward to the first edition, Roman numeral page 13. It said we, and I think that's probably the largest word in Alcoholics Anonymous. We can do what I can't do. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. They're already beginning to tell us again as to what the problem is. It's a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And a little later on tonight, we're going to separate those two ideas, the body from the mind, to talk about them in great detail. And it says to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. You notice that the word precisely how we have recovered is in italics. Charley would have you to believe that it's squiggly writing. It isn't. It's italics.
Squiggly writing.
Yeah. And anytime you see squiggly, he's got me doing it now. Anytime you see italics in this book, it becomes very, very important. Probably ought to read it again. And it says precisely. Later on in the book, we're going to find words such as specifically, exactly, with clear-cut directions. So this book is not a book on just about how to recover from alcoholism. This book is going to tell us precisely, specifically, exactly, with clear-cut directions on how to recover from alcoholism. And if I want to recover from alcoholism, guess what? I need to do it precisely, specifically, and exactly, and try to follow the clear-cut direction as best I can. Otherwise, I may not recover from alcoholism.
The sponsor now that actually said to me when I was telling her about this particular slide, she said something to the effect of so often in the rooms we hear people say, take what you want and leave the rest. Well, what Joe has basically said here is that it's precisely, specifically, and exactly with clear-cut set of directions. If we're not following the directions, chances are we're not going to recover the way that the first 100 recovered. Joe tells us a little bit more history about the doctor's opinion in this next slide here.
Alcoholics Anonymous, I had become everything I detested in a human being. I did not like who I had become, and I was very, very sick. It wasn't until after I got into listening to and the description of Dr. Silkworth's opinion on alcoholism that I began to understand what I had here. And it wasn't that I was a no-good, rotten SOB. I had an illness called alcoholism, a physical allergy coupled with obsession of the mind, and somehow or other that information helped me overcome some of these ideas that I had. And as I look back now and I know more about this, the very first 16 printings of this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the doctor's opinion was on page 1. 1955, in the second edition, they moved the doctor's opinion out of the page 1 and put it in the Roman numeral sections. But the information in the doctor's opinion is so important to me and to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, because the rest of the book is going to tell us how to recover from the condition of the body and the mind that Dr. Silkworth described. And I said I was alcoholic for about 2 years, and I didn't even know what an alcoholic was, really.
That I was identifying with the 12-step room that I walked in for 4 years and didn't even know what that actually meant. So I can certainly identify with 2 years of identifying as something you are not even sure what it is. So we're going to move on to where Charley actually is convinced that God got sick of seeing people die from the disease of addiction and alcoholism, and allow these things to allow this book to be created, allow these people to become together. And he's going to start with Dr. Silkworth.
As I look at our history, which we're going to be doing a lot of this weekend, I'm convinced in my mind that God got tired of seeing people like us die from alcoholism. And he took various different people from around the world and gave us these pieces of information that allows us to recover from that condition today. And I think one of the first persons that he used was this little doctor called Dr. Silkworth.
I remember Dr. Silkworth had been working with alcoholics for years, and at this point, he'd already worked with Bill. He had helped Bill recover at least 3 times that we know of in the Towns Hospital in New York City. And what we know is that he started developing these theories about alcoholics, but he couldn't prove it. So therefore, he needed a little bit more information to be able to prove it. So let's see what Dr. Silkworth was starting to learn about alcoholism and alcoholics. And then ultimately, all the 12-step programs were able to benefit from what we've learned from Dr. Silkworth.
Silky went to work in the town hospital in 1930. And he began to work with people like us, and he began to see us come into the hospital. Terrible, terrible physical and mental condition. And he began to withdraw us from alcohol, build the body up, and etc. And 30, 60, 90 days later, he would see us leave the hospital in reasonably good shape. And then a month or 2 or 3 or 4 later, he'd see us come back in worse shape than we were before. Continually going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. He also noticed some people that he worked with who drank like we drank, but did not go in and out and in and out and in and out. He also noticed other people who drank moderately and safely. And he began to say there's something different about these alcoholics. There's something different about the body. Apparently alcohol does something to them that it doesn't do to normal people. And he began to develop this little idea that when you put alcohol in your body, it produces an actual physical craving that makes it impossible for us to stop drinking. But he also said even in those days, that's not the real problem with the alcoholic. He said the real problem is that the alcoholic cannot keep from drinking.
So he also, what he's saying there is that they have the physical craving, which is the physical part. And then there's a mental obsession, which he says they can't keep from drinking. Even sober, they want to drink. So they went to Dr. Silkworth and they wanted to get him to write part of the book. And this is some of the thoughts that he had on alcoholism. He thought people like Bill and like many of the other alcoholics had a different kind of problem. He defines the alcoholic and the problem drinker.
People who are heavy drinkers, people who are moderate drinkers, if they want to quit drinking, they just quit, and it don't bother them at all. But he said it seems as though the alcoholic, after they quit, the mind begins to play tricks on them and begins to think about one or two drinks and how it makes them feel. And he said that idea becomes so powerful that it overcomes the idea that they can't drink, and they take a drink and end up drunk every time. He said, now if you can't drink safely, and if you can't keep from drinking, then you're powerless over alcohol.
Having said those words were some of the most powerful things for me when I first came out. If I can't stop eating my alcoholic foods, if I can't eat them safely and I can't keep from eating them safely, then I'm powerless over that particular food. And there is a list now of things that I'm actually powerless over. So we're going to go on to see a little bit more about the doctor's opinion and what Dr. Silkworth had to say about this. As they started to see these people are staying sober, and they went to him and they wanted to get a little bit more information. And now you're going to see why it changed. The doctor's opinion changed, and you can hear at the end here why it changed. Why the doctor's opinion changed.
We know Bill is probably the first one to act on that information. Then after Bill got sober, and after Dr. Bob got sober, and after Bill Dodson got sober, and after the first 40 got sober, based on that information, and decided to write the book, they went to see Dr. Silkworth and said, well, you let us put that information in the book so that other alcoholics can see what their problem is too. And they said, will you write some of it for us? And the doctor said, yeah, you can use it, and I'll write some of it under one condition, that we will call it the doctor's opinion. He said, I can't prove it. There's no facts behind it, so we'll just have to call it an opinion. And he said, by the way, don't use my name. He said, they'll throw me completely out of the medical profession if you use my name on this deal. In 1956, when they came out with the second edition, 1955 and 56, they came out with the second edition. By that time, the Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, had recognized the fact that alcoholism is an illness. And Dr. Silkworth said in the second edition, you can put my name in it now.
So in the first 16 printings that you heard Joe talk about, Dr. Silkworth's name does not appear in there, but in the third and fourth editions, it certainly does. And as you can see on this screen here, Dr. Silkworth's name, he signed off on the letter that he actually wrote for Alcoholics Anonymous. Now we go into the abnormal reaction that people have, because I certainly don't know what's normal for sure, but they want to talk about the abnormal reaction that the alcoholic has. We want to get a little bit more information about the problem.
Let's go to Roman numeral page 24. That's XXIV. And I didn't know that when I got sober. He said, the physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. Now, we know there's no must in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, but there are a lot of musts in this book called Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's one of the first one. We must believe that the body is of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as the mind.
Now, this is the first time we can find anywhere in written history a reference to the fact that the body is affected as well as the mind. Everything up until this time, they had talked about the mind only. Weak will, moral character, sin, and etc. But here we see a statement that says the body is quite as abnormal as the mind. I think he's telling us two things. That the body is affected also, but I think he's also saying the mind is abnormal when it comes to alcohol. We react to it different physically and also mentally in an abnormal manner.
I certainly do react differently, but I do want to circle back to something that Joe said. He was talking about there are no must in the Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's talking about the fellowship because the only desire for membership the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop hurting yourself with your addictive food or your with alcohol. So there are actually no must in the fellowship, but in this book, they are saying we must believe that the body of the alcoholic is quite abnormal as his mind. So those were the differences there. So in the doctor's opinion, we continue on with a little bit more about an abnormal reaction. And one of the abnormal reactions that I have to my alcoholic foods is I actually, because I've had bariatric surgery in the past, I can ingest some alcoholic foods and my face will turn red, my stomach will hurt, I'll get cramps all over my body. And I'm talking like severe cramps. So I can understand what it looks like to actually have an allergy. So we're going to take a small look at the abnormal reaction that alcoholics have to alcohol.
Not satisfied to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. Now, these things were true to some extent. In fact, to a considerable extent with some of us.
You betcha.
But we're sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinions to its soundness may, of course, mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say this explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account.
Now,
I certainly couldn't account for my reaction, whereas I see other people eating my alcoholic foods with impunity, with absolutely no trouble whatsoever, whereas I'm curled up in a ball after eating them. Never stopped me, by the way, from eating them, but definitely I have an abnormal reaction, and I can appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the allergy itself. And an allergy, you'll hear Charley talk a little bit about the definition of allergy as he sees it.
With. And I think the first word we've had a real problem with is this word allergy. You know, most of us, when we come here, we assume already we know what an allergy is. I know I did. And I knew if you were allergic to something, and you got around it, or you ate it, or you drank it, or something like that, that there would be some physical manifestation or indicator of that allergy. So I knew if you were allergic to something, there would be something there that you could see. So they came to me and they said, Charley, you've got an allergy to alcohol. You'll never be able to safely drink it again. And I said, how in the hell can I be allergic to alcohol? I'm drinking a quart a day. How can you possibly drink that much of something you're allergic to? I don't think they understood it a bit better than I did. And I went from person to person to person to person, trying to get somebody to explain this allergy to me. And all they would say is, what difference does it make? Forget the damned allergy. Don't drink and you'll be all right. Keep coming to meetings. Now, if you're an alcoholic like I am, with a keen intellectual alcoholic mind, and you get a question like that dangling out here in front of you, if you don't get the answer to it, sooner or later it's going to drive you out of your mind. And one day, in sheer desperation, I went to a source of information that has never failed me since that time. I went to the dictionary. And I looked up the word allergy, and I found several different definitions of it, the way you do with any word, depending on how you use it. But I think I found the one that fit me exactly. When it said an allergy is an abnormal reaction to any food, beverage, or substance of any kind.
And what I want you to do is, if you have a moment, I want you to write down because when we get to the question and comments time at the end of this, after we've stopped the recording, I would love it if you shared what your abnormal reaction to a food, beverage, or substance of any kind looks like for you. If you don't mind sharing that, that would be wonderful. So, what is normal? So, what is normal? I don't know what is normal. And you're going to hear Charley talk about he needed to talk to a normal, social, temperate, moderate drinker. And for me, when I first started studying this many years ago, or start looking at this, my sponsor said to me, find someone who's a normal, that doesn't have the problem that you have with your alcoholic foods. And it dawned on me, I didn't have many people surrounding me that had a problem with food the way that I had. I mean, I didn't have many people around me that wasn't responding to food the same way that I did. So it took me going to a meeting in which I was going to be a presenter, and I had to listen to listen to record the information to be able to report at the end. And it was a working lunch, and they laid a basket of my alcoholic foods on the table, and I literally missed 25 minutes of conversation because I couldn't hear because that basket was so loud. My alcoholic foods were so loud. And that's just an example of what it looked like. Now, when I ate that piece of my alcoholic food, because I did later on that day, my reaction is very much what they are going to be talking about now.
So to find out what's normal, to see if I'm abnormal, I have to go to the normal, social, temperate, moderate drinker, those who drink alcohol and do not get in trouble with it. And I asked them to describe to me how they feel when they take a drink. And they said, well, we come home from work, tired, tense, wrought up from the day's work. We can have a couple of drinks before dinner. We begin to get a relaxing, comfortable feeling. Well, I don't feel that way when I drink alcohol. Whenever I take a drink of alcohol, it passes over my lips. My lips begin to tingle immediately. Hits my teeth and they kind of chatter up and down. Strikes my tongue and I can feel it begin to grow and expand and swell. Hits my cheeks and they kind of flutter in and out. Now, I hadn't even swallowed the damn stuff yet. I just got it in my mouth. When I swallow that alcohol, it happens is my chest begins to grow and expand and gets bigger and bigger. I'm getting taller and taller, and it hits my feet and toes, and they get a hot, intense, burning, exciting, get up and go somewhere and do something feeling. I don't understand a comfortable, relaxing feeling when you have a drink. You see, for most people, when they put alcohol in the system, it hits the stomach, it immediately goes into the bloodstream, immediately goes to the brain. And for a normal drinker, it acts as a downer. It's a sedative. It is supposed to give them a slightly tipsy, out-of-control feeling. Now, when it goes into my stomach, into my bloodstream, into my brain, instead of me getting a slightly tipsy, out-of-control feeling, alcohol, for me, acts as an upper. It's a stimulant. And my brain gets a very exciting, in-control feeling. They have 2 drinks and they want to go to bed. I have 2 drinks and by God, I want to go to town immediately. Alcohol is a toxic substance, a destroyer of human tissue. When you put it in your body, your mind and your body is supposed to react to it with nausea and say, puke it up and get it out of here. When I put it in my body, instead of my body experience a feeling of nausea, my body experiences an actual physical craving which demands more of the same. Their body said, puke it up. Mine said, put some more in here. So not only do I react to it differently mentally, but I also react to it differently physically. Now, the only difference between normal and abnormal is what do the majority of the people do. If the majority, 9 out of 10, react that way, 1 out of 10 reacts the way I do, then my reaction is considered to be abnormal. Therefore, I'm considered to be allergic to alcohol. You can't see it. You can only feel it.
And only alcoholics can feel it. For absolute sure. And that is what it was like when I took that alcoholic food. I only intended to have one, and I ended up having to go to Sam's or one of the big box stores and getting the family size to be able to do it. And even though I was in so much pain, I couldn't stand up at one point. I let it pass long enough to be able to start doing it again. So my reaction is absolutely abnormal to my alcoholic foods. And then we look at the phenomenon of craving. So now I've put that food in my body, and what happens? I got to have more and more and more and more. So let's find out about it. So we're going to find a little bit more about the actual physical craving of the body that demands more of the same. So let's find out.
So we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholic is a manifestation of an allergy, and that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all, and once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence to reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve.
The action of strawberries on one who's allergic to strawberries is manifested by a rash. The action of milk on one who's allergic to milk is manifested by dysentery. The action of ragweeds on one who is allergic to ragweeds is manifested by itchy, watery eyes, sneezing, and etc. The action of alcohol on one who's allergic to alcohol is manifested by, and he refers to it as the phenomenon of craving. He uses the word phenomenon because he didn't understand it. So what it is, it's manifested by an actual physical craving in the body that demands more of the same after we've once started.
Let's look at craving versus obsession.
And the word craving is very, very important. You know, I hear people today say, well, I came to AA and I craved a drink for 4 years. No, in the context of the big book, that's the wrong use of the word craving. They might have needed a drink, wanted a drink, desired a drink. The only way an alcoholic can crave alcohol is to first put it in the body. Then the physical craving develops, and then we can't stop and we end up drunk. So in the recovery section of the book, when you see the word craving, it's always referring to the body, never to the mind. We'll use the word obsession for the mind. The word craving is for the body.
In that story that I told earlier, it started with obsession and then it ended with craving after I put the food in my mouth. So let's see what the 5 types of drinkers or addicts are in this case. So we're still looking at the doctor's opinion, and we're looking at Roman numeral 28, if you're following along with your big book.
Now, he goes on a little further over on Roman numeral 28, and he talks about 5 different kinds of drinkers. Then he drives this idea of the phenomenon of craving home being an allergy one more time. Let's look at these 5 drinkers.
He said the classification of alcoholics is on Roman numeral page 28. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. He said there are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We're all familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon for keeps, and they're over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision.
We call that type 1.
There is a type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment.
That's type 2.
There is a type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger.
Type 3.
There is a manic-depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written.
That's type 4. I always thought I was the next one, type 5.
So then there are types entirely normal in every respect, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people.
Now he makes his point one more time. All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence.
Once again, at the end of this, I would love to hear if you can identify with any of the 5 types. And for me, I've identified with all of them at some point. I've been unwilling to admit that I can't eat these alcoholic foods. I've tried various different ways by using substitute foods. I've done a lot of things, but ended up only hurting myself. I mean, I can identify with all 5 types of types of drinkers that there are, types of addicts that there are. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the handout. So if the moderator could put a link to the handout to in the chat, the people can actually see this handout for themselves. He starts to break down the science. Now, once again, this is not AA approved in any way. On the left side of this slide, what I've done is I'm going to ask AI. I didn't write this myself. I wanted to know what was the breakdown of alcoholism versus what's the breakdown of sugar and flour products. And they turns out they don't break down the same. Now, they have the same response to the brain, but they don't break down the same. So as Charley is talking about this, just know that if your drug of choice is sugar or flour, then it breaks down slightly. Now, it has the same effect on your mental, but it doesn't have the same physical effect. In the first part of this, we're going to be talking about that center where we see the red, and then we'll go over to the left side talking about the physical. And about 2 more slides here, close to the end, I think we only have 5 slides left. We are going to talk about the mental obsession.
They have proven that the doctor's opinion is no longer just an opinion. It's actual truth. Now we're going to look at a little picture here for just a minute. And I want to stress that this is not AA information. AA won't get involved into why we're allergic because that might bring controversy. So let's look at it for just a moment. In the center of that picture, there's 9 people there that drink safely. They are at ease with alcohol. They take a drink or two, the mind and body senses it, the enzyme production starts, and the enzymes attacks the alcohol, breaks it down into acetaldehyde, then to diacetic acid, then to acetone. In the final stages, it becomes a simple carbohydrate made up of water, sugar, and carbon dioxide. In the normal social drinker, this takes place at the rate of approximately 1 ounce per hour. And if they don't drink more than 1 ounce per hour, they can't get drunk. They'll either go to sleep or they'll puke on you, 1 of the 2 every time. The left-hand side is the one who does not drink safely, or is at disease with alcohol. And if you want to use the word disease, that's all it means. Something that separates you from the norm. We alcoholics put it in our body, the same thing happens. It seems as though in our bodies, the enzymes necessary to complete the metabolism, breaking it down from acetone to the simple carbohydrate, are not there in the same qualities and or quantities as they are in the body of the non-alcoholic. Therefore, it stays in our body for a longer period of time as acetone. It is proven today that acetone ingested into the human system that remains there for an appreciable period of time will produce an actual physical craving for more of the same. The non-alcoholic's body, it goes through that stage so rapidly the craving never occurs. In our body, it stays there long enough, the craving develops, and that demands a second drink. Now just think, you got most of the acetone from the first, now you put that in from the second. The acetone level goes up. And if the acetone is what causes the craving, then the craving becomes harder with the second drink. Now you put in the third. You got most of the first, nearly all the second. Now you put in the acetone from the third, and the craving goes up. And that demands a fourth. You got most of the first, nearly all the second, that from the third. Now you put in the acetone from the fourth, and as the acetone level increases, the craving becomes harder. I got a hell of a lot more than I needed, more than I could stand, but I never got all I wanted. Because the more you drink, the higher the craving, the more you want, it's just endless. Mm-hmm. Now, if this never got any worse, we could probably learn to live with this situation. But we know not only do we have an illness, we have a progressive illness that always gets worse and never better. So not only do we have a physical illness, we have a progressive physical illness due to two factors, damage to the body and also due to the aging factor.
We start to talk about the mind. We're seeing the physical part of it. So now we're going to talk about the mental. We're going to talk about the mind, and that's going to be the obsession portion of this presentation. We start with the big book, page 28 here, and I think it's on line 29. So we start to talk about the mind there, and you'll hear Joe and Charley talk extensively about how it affects our mind. We will also then see that same picture that we showed before of how it responds in the mind.
Now, I'm the same way when it comes to alcohol. Left on my own resources, from time to time, my mind tells me it's okay to drink alcohol. Then I take the drink and then the allergy takes over. So the real problem centers in my mind rather than my body. Let's look at the mind for just a few minutes, and then we'll be through for the night.
Charley said the doctor said he has never been by any treatment which we are familiar permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is the entire abstinence. In other words, if we have an allergy to alcohol and we crave more when we drink, he suggests we don't drink. And that's the end of that. So now we're going to talk about the most dangerous part of the illness. And the most dangerous part of the illness of alcoholism is when we're not drinking. You know why it's the most dangerous part of the illness? Because we're thinking about drinking. We're going to start talking about the mind, twofold illness. We talked about the physical allergy in great detail. Now we're going to talk about the obsession of the mind. It's in bottom page, Roman numeral page 26. It says men and women drink essentially because they lack the effect produced by alcohol.
Now, many alcoholics are highly offended when you say that. They say the reason I drink is because I love the taste of alcohol. I wouldn't argue with them whether they do or not. I love the taste of cold beer. I always have all my life, as far back as I can remember. I also love the taste of cold mountain spring water. I never did sit down and drink a case of cold mountain spring water.
Oh, that's a great example because that certainly does solidify for me as well. I mean, I love the taste of green beans for sure, but I've never sat down and had an entire bag of green beans like I've had an entire bag of my salty crunchies or ooey gooeys or creamy or cold and creamies. I've just never done that. So it's amazing how he refers to that. So in the doctor's opinion, we're still looking at the mind. We're talking about the psychic change now that has to happen. So we're still in the big book in the doctor's opinion section. I think we're on page 26 or 27 here.
Now, if it gave me a slightly tipsy, out of control, beginnings of a nauseous feeling, I wouldn't love that. But you see, it gives me that great, exciting, in-control feeling and allows me to function in a manner I've never been able to function before. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol.
And after a while, I began to do some of those things that Charley talked about. And I began to drink more and more and more. And I began to wake up some mornings with a little guilt, shame, and remorse as a result of things that I was doing while drinking. And that brought on more drinking, and I had to drink to get rid of those feelings, so another effect by which I drank. And as the years and time went by and the trouble that I had in my life went by, in the end, I drank for the sickest effect of all, which is total oblivion. So there are many, many effects by which we drink, and it progressively gets worse. He said the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they can after a time differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one, and I couldn't recognize the truth from the false because my alcoholic life had become normal to me. So my alcoholic life had become normal. The abnormal had become normal, and I couldn't hardly tell the truth from the false in that light.
Enforced periods of sobriety.
He said, to them, they are restless, irritable, and discontented. Put a few little words in there, too. Said we're full of guilt, shame, and remorse. And remember, when we first got sober, we were new, they said if we didn't drink, we were going to feel better. Well, you're going to feel better, all right. You're going to feel resentment better. You're going to feel anger better. You're going to feel a lot of things better.
Now, begin to think about what one or two drinks will do for us. We don't think about what 20 drinks will do, or 30. We think about what 1 or 2 will do for us.
So unless they can again experience a sense of ease of comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. And impunity simply means that those people are drinking and seemingly they don't have any problems. And after they have succumbed to desire again, as so many do.
After we've finally given in and taken a couple of drinks.
And then the phenomenal craving develops. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. Times have you done that? Come off of one of those big drunks, some long, extended period drunks, and promise them and yourself and anybody that will listen, I'll never do it again. I'm through. I promise you, I'm through. And those of you who made those promises, you know that we were sincere and we meant that. He said this is repeated over and over and over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope for his recovery. So you quit talking about the body now. He's talking about the psychic change, the mind. Later on in our book, the psychic change is going to be described as a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening, a personality change. All 4 words meaning the same thing. A psychic change. There's very little hope for its recovery. So the change is going to have to become here in the mind.
And once again, we are talking about the mind here. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at that handout one more time. And we're going to see how the mental and the physical are working together to cause that obsession and cause that physical allergy.
Let's look at this picture up here again for just a moment. Over here on this side, we could see that because of the allergy, we can no longer safely drink alcohol. But as we said before, that's not going to bother us if we don't take the first drink. So apparently the problem is going to be over on this side. The real problem centers in the mind, telling us we can drink, rather than in the body that ensures that we can't drink. So the only possible means of recovery would be to find a way to live where our mind don't tell us it's okay to drink. We're dealing here with the way we think. We're dealing here with the way that we feel whenever we're sober. As a kid growing up, I had that emotional problem. And one night somebody gave me that drink of moonshine whiskey. And immediately those problems disappeared. And that great, exciting, in-control feeling came over me. And I was allowed to ask that girl to dance, take her home, and get in the back seat of that 36 Chevrolet. It answered my problem that night. My mind immediately recorded what it did for me. The next time I got into a solution where I didn't feel right, things were not right, my mind said, if you could find a drink, you'd feel better. And I found a drink of whiskey, and God, the magic happened the second time. In other words, alcohol became the solution to my emotional problems. Now, if I had been non-alcoholic and that worked for me, that would have been great. But I also had that physical allergy over there on that side. The mind causing me to drink. The allergy causing me to get drunk. The emotions after coming off the drunk to feed the mind caused me to drink. And the drink then would trigger the allergy, and as time went by, it got worse and worse and worse. Because this is a progressive illness, the drinking would become harder and harder, the trouble would become more and more, the restlessness, irritability, guilt, remorse became more and more, the emotions became worse and worse to trigger the idea of taking the first drink. The mind destroying the body and the body destroying the mind.
That's basically it in a nutshell. And on this last slide that we have, we're talking about willpower and powerlessness. And we are still in the doctor's opinion. And I'm not quite sure of the page number because I forgot to write it down here. But we are still in the doctor's opinion talking about the powerlessness. And this will be our last slide before we have the moderator stop the recording so that I can hear from you.
If I could find a way to live where I could be sober and not be restless, irritable, and discontented, If I could find a way to live where I could be sober and not be filled with shame, fear, guilt, and remorse, just maybe I could find a way to live where I could have peace of mind, serenity, and happiness. Ship alone will not bring that about. The program will. Let's read the very next statement in the big book.
And he says, on the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once the psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. And as Charley said, those few simple rules are the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And our book says that in the 12 and 12, if practiced as a way of life, will expel the obsession to drink and make the person happily and usefully old. And that is called recovery. And that's exactly what the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is all about.
That takes us to the end of our doctor's opinion. I'm going to ask the moderator to please stop the recording. And then we want
Thanks for recovering with us.